So hello and welcome to the Royal Rota. This is a new series from ITV, one which will be talking about all the big stories involving the royal family, the stuff that's coming up and also the stuff that's just happened. And just to give you an idea why we've called it the Royal Rota, it's the name that's given to the operation for all the correspondents which cover the royal family. And in this room we'll be talking to those who write for and broadcast about the British royal family from all over the world. And that gives me a good time to introduce our guests in the studio. Firstly, you'll see here is Hugh Whitfeld. Now, I always joke with Hugh that you actually do more royal stories than I do. You are the Europe Bureau Chief for Seven Network in Australia. And despite being on the other side of the world, the Australians do pay a lot of attention to what our royal family do.
Exactly. I think some people here maybe forget sometimes that they are our royal family, or the Queen is the Queen of Australia as well. So there is a huge amount of interest. It hasn't dissipated over the years. In fact, it may have got stronger.
And this year in particular, as we will discuss with the royal wedding, it's obviously got a lot bigger. And right next to me is someone that I work with every single day, which is the royal producer for ITV. You might say, Lizzie, you're the one that does all the work in this little operation that we have going here. But on every cough and spit of the royal family, Lizzie is the person who does it all.
He's coaxed me out
yes,
behind
exactly.
the camera.
Yes, we pushed her in front of the camera and made her do this, as you can probably tell from the grimace on her face. Anyway, let's talk about the royal wedding, because actually we're coming up to a point, quite a big point, 100 days of since the royal wedding. Now, what are your views, looking back on that massive event in May? What do you remember most? I mean, I suppose I remember the sunshine, the crowds, and a sort of collective smile on the nation's face. Would that be right?
Yeah, I think it was a great week leading up to it, especially to be in Windsor, the build-up towards it, the crowds gathering, the people camping out, some of them the regulars that we see at every royal event, whether it's a birth or a wedding like this.
In the Union Jack sort of suits and hats.
Crown hats.
Exactly, and not wanting to move from their spot on the footpath.
And they always have a collective of international media surrounding them, as if to say this is what everyone in the UK looks like.
Well, I think we're at the point, I'm certainly at the point now where I know them on the first name basis, because we see them every couple of months or so, and they seem to be the same people, but they are the super
outside
fans.
The Lindo wing.
Exactly.
Camping before
exactly.
Louis
They are.
yeah.
But I think the thing about the wedding was that there was so many more people who were interested in this, and we saw those amazing crowds on the long walk throughout the day that builded up from very early in the morning.
I mean, I just think in my head I have that view. I think it must have been quite a big jib camera that was up high, and it just looked back along the long walk, and it was just crowds and crowds of people on both sides. A couple of TV studios. We had one. You had another, of course. It was just so busy there, wasn't it?
Yeah, I spent much of the day down with those crowds with our roving camera as part of the coverage, and everybody was in a good mood. And a lot of people were drinking from very early in the morning, so they got in a better mood throughout the day. But there was a genuine level of excitement. And of course, for those people that were there, it was such a fantastic spot to be, because they had the big screens to be able to watch the ceremony that the people in town didn't have. And then they were always going to catch a glimpse of Harry and Meghan as well as they went past in the carriage, which was great.
And Lizzie, I remember myself and you on the back of a golf buggy going past all the crowds. It was a great experience.
Yeah, while they were waiting for
studios.
Meghan and her mum to drive down, they got us in the back of the golf buggy driving up the long walk to our studio.
Not quite the same. Although we probably were going more slowly than they were, because I remember when Meghan came down, she absolutely sped down that long walk, didn't she, with her mother, with almost like kicking up some dust behind them. And I suppose that sort of segues into what Harry and Meghan have done since, because if we reach that 100-day mark, as we now are, I mean, where do you think, what the public's view of Meghan and Harry? For example, she hasn't done a single event on her own yet. She's been with the Queen, she's been with her husband, the Duke of Sussex. We keep saying Meghan, we should call her the Duchess of Sussex. Are you surprised that we haven't yet had an official announcement from Kensington Palace that this is what Meghan's going to do, these are the charities that she's going to champion?
Well, I think they've used these first sort of 100 days to give Meghan the chance to learn the royal ropes. You know, she's been out to Chester with the Queen, she's always had Harry by her side, or, you know, Wimbledon with Kate. So it's given her a chance to kind of learn how joining the royal family works before she goes out there on her own, which must be quite a daunting and new experience.
And
Someone who's just married into the family.
All the while doing her homework, because actually whatever charity or causes she decides to champion, that is quite a big deal, because that's going to be with her and also with that particular charity for quite some period of time. You think of Harry and the military veterans, for example.
Yeah, and I think we've speculated, everyone's been speculating about what direction she's going to take and a role that she's going to take on. And clearly there's a treading of the water to try and work out where the Duchess of Sussex will fit into what is bringing her into the firm, so to speak, adds another member of the family to carry out engagements like this. And I was thinking over the last couple of days when we received a flurry of announcements in the last 24 hours about upcoming events, that we are kind of at the point now where we've had the first engagement after the wedding. We had the first overseas trip to Ireland after the wedding. They've got a big tour coming up that we'll talk about in a moment, I think. But
she's had a balcony appearance.
The balcony appearance with the Queen. So we've ticked off a lot of those firsts. But that you're right. That is the last one to come, really, in terms of her solo appearance.
And my understanding is that's coming at the end of the year. So actually, we've got to wait quite a long time. Many people might have thought that announcement about the charities that she will champion will come before the big tour to Australia, but apparently it's still some way off, perhaps at the end of this year, which means what she's doing at the moment is a lot of homework. There's a lot of private meetings going on that we know nothing about, and a lot of people that she's meeting to try and decide exactly what it is she wants to do.
And that probably shows that she takes it incredibly seriously, and what she does champion and those causes that she wants to get it right and make sure that she's really backing causes that she can make a difference to.
Yes, and you look about what she was doing even before she met Prince Harry, and she was already helping out in Africa with water aid projects. She was helping out in India, with girls in school who don't have any sort of sanitary care, and it affects their education. She was already doing this stuff before she was a royal, and that's quite important to note, isn't it?
And promoting gender equality, I think we'll see something in there among her patronage.
It's got to be in the mix,
where she'll be supporting gender equality.
And I think that one of the best ways for her to begin that path is as that fourth patron of the Royal Foundation, that the two princes and the Duchess of Cambridge have been the patrons of up until this point. Of course, the Duchess of Sussex joining as the fourth patron after the wedding. That is the best possible vehicle potentially for her to begin that role solo.
And also, the three of them so far have all taken different areas to focus on, and I think probably Meghan will be looking at where she can make a difference that's maybe different to Kate and William and Harry, and that's not being focused on by the four of them.
And everything at the moment has been in support of her husband's work. For example, even next week they're doing this gala performance of Hamilton in the West End. And that's for Centre Ballet, the AIDS charity that Harry founded initially in Lesotho, which has now expanded to some other countries. They're doing the Whale Child Awards as well.
Which Harry has, I think, been patron of since 2007.
Exactly. Everything at the moment is in support of husband. We don't quite know yet how she is going to do things.
There is, of course, an American tie to Hamilton, and I think that on that night, that will be pointed out, especially that Meghan is attending an American production.
Yeah.
Well, they have actually been once before in London together, I think, on a date. So this is on a private visit. So
and meanwhile, some nice holidaying going on at the moment. And actually, the most recent places they've been is to stay with the Clooneys in Italy. So a nice big mansion to stay with on the shores of Lake Como, which couldn't have been too bad.
Compared to Balmoral Castle, probably a little bit more relaxed, maybe a nice view over...
A bit more sunny.
Lake Como,
Although the views in Balmoral are absolutely stunning. And we think they are going to go up and see the Queen and Prince Philip. And we will, of course, talk about Prince Philip a bit later, because not only has he had that hip operation, there have been sort of some social media rumours about his health as well. And we will, of course, talk about that. But, I mean, it's been a pretty busy few months, isn't it? Even before the royal wedding, we had royal babies and and hospital operations. It's for anyone who covers the royals, and as we said, you do it a lot.
Yeah.
I mean, what you say your royal wedding figures were something like 6 million?
We had 3.5 million watching our 7 network coverage.
Total in Australia, 6
Total in coverage, yeah. Four networks, so four of the five networks covering live the wedding, and I think if you aggregated the figures together, it would have been about 5.5, 6 million people watching.
In a country of 25 million, so
exactly,
about a quarter of the whole population watching it.
Yeah, and it was prime time on a Saturday night, so it was a perfect time. They're the sort of figures that you would really only get for an Australian Open tennis final or the opening ceremony of the Sydney Olympics. So they were quite remarkable figures. And they are people watching on television, not on devices, iPads, iPhones, and things like that.
So what are the Republican movement in Australia? Because we touch on that every time there's a royal visit, and we say, has it changed? Is it going in any particular direction, or is it very static? A bit like it is here. It's a very static number of people who want us to be a republic.
Look, it rears its head every year at about Australia Day, which is January 26th, the National Day, and it's one of those things that the papers like to raise. The last referendum was back in 1999. It was defeated relatively heavily, and it's been basically off the agenda since then. The current Prime Minister at this very moment, because he may be rolled sometime this week, was the leader of the Republican campaign back in 1999, Malcolm Turnbull. And for the first time when he became Prime Minister a couple of years ago, we had the leader of the opposition and the Prime Minister who were both fervent Republicans. Now, that's the first time that that's happened. Malcolm Turnbull is the leader of a Conservative party that is apparently a monarchist party. So he has said to this point that he is not a monarchist, but he is an Elizabethan. And so he will if he is the Prime Minister when there is a change of the sovereign, then he would maybe call on a referendum then, but not before then, not while the Queen is still the Queen.
Yes, because obviously there's a lot of issues that Prince Charles, the Prince of Wales, will have to deal with when he takes over the top job. One of those being, how that goes around in Canada and Australia and other countries of which he is the head of state. But we'll talk about the tour to your country a bit later on. I don't think we can talk about Meghan Markle without talking about what's been happening with her father, which essentially has been a desperately sad situation, a breakdown in whatever way you look at it, a breakdown in the relationship between Meghan and her father, Thomas Markle. And every time I see an interview, either on the television, Good Morning Britain had that one, or I open the pages of the Mail on Sunday or the Sun, and I see another interview which is said to be his final interview, and then a week later there's another one. I mean, we're going to talk about it. Obviously, it's quite a big deal for the family at the moment. But, I mean, it's a desperately sad situation for Meghan, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, for Thomas Markle, he'd been pretty silent right up until that week before the wedding. And then it was almost like he had that hotline to TMZ, and we heard from him a lot. And since then, we've heard post-wedding from Thomas in numerous magazines or newspapers and the Good Morning Britain interview.
And essentially, I mean, one of the most recent ones was he was accusing the royal family of being like a bunch of Scientologists. They don't like people talking about them. They close shop when people start to criticise them. He's spoken about how he was told by Meghan that there was no room for his speech at the royal wedding. I mean, if he wants to reconnect with his daughter, I mean, you've got to be quite blunt about this. He's going about it the wrong way, because one way in which he's not going to reconnect with him is if he keeps giving interviews to newspapers and television.
And he isn't stopping talking, that's the thing. And unfortunately for the palace, August is a royal news vacuum month because most of the senior royals, all the senior royals are on holiday, so there's no engagements for correspondence and the papers to cover. Seemingly whoever's got Thomas Markle's number can call him and get an interview anytime and run it as an exclusive the next day. And then the rival newspaper, so the Sun and the Mirror have basically been trading phone calls with him for the last 10 days or so, and every new interview offers one line really that is different to the previous one. It is a massive PR challenge for the palace, because if this is going to continue, I think after the wedding we certainly kind of had a discussion about how we're going to deal with this going forward, and decided that look, we're not going to cover every single thing that he says, because it's becoming a little bit boring in a way.
And a bit repetitive. There's not always anything massively new about it. I think the last time we did it, for example, was when Good Morning Britain had that interview. Piers Morgan interviewed him over a couple of hours on Good Morning Britain. He appeared then to me to be quite measured. Yeah. He made a little bit of a slip when he said, Harry spoke to me about Brexit and about Donald Trump, and at which point everyone looks up and says, what did he say about that? And, to be fair, it wasn't anything significant. He said, he just said we should be open to the change, both in the US and to do with Brexit. Since then, he appears to be becoming more and more critical of not only the royal family, but also of his daughter. And there's now a massive debate about, is the royal family handling this well? Should they have sent someone over to Mexico or to America to look after him, to advise him? It sort of feels now like it's a bit too late for that, doesn't it?
Well, I think there's one side that says, look, it's Meghan's family, maybe she should be the one deciding, but the flip side to that is that you're dealing with a very important, the most important family, and then secondly, a very important brand that seemingly needs to be protected. I think if you compare it to the way that the Middletons have been handled by the royal family, they were brought into the fold, and so
yes,
they
also
have
how
been,
the Middletons have just approached it in a very different way to the Markles. Now we're talking here about Thomas Markle, her father, and some of her half brothers and sisters. We're not talking about her mother, who you could say has acted in a very similar way to the Middleton. She got her head down, she hasn't said anything, and she's just gone about...
She's just been there for
Yes.
Meghan, hasn't she? She's just quietly got on with it and been...
And we hear so many different reports about the nature of the relationship between Thomas and Meghan, because Thomas and Doria Ragland divorced when Meghan was 2. Meghan was essentially raised by her mother.
But she did live with her father for quite a period of time when she was at the school, because her high school was closest to his house. And he's always at pains to point out that, you know, Meghan hasn't been estranged from me for all her life. She lived with me. I looked after her. I took her to school. She came with me to watch the recording of the shows that he was working on. He was a lighting technician. So whatever happened has happened very recently, and I think their relationship is now in a very sorry place.
And the sad thing is even if he's using all these interviews to sort of reach out to her and provoke a reaction, I think it's just probably going to push her away.
Having the opposite effect.
Yeah, and her fear must be, well, if I do strike up a conversation and I do talk to him, is that going to end up in the newspapers?
And I think for Harry that's a concern as
Yeah,
well,
of
because
course.
if he picks up the phone and tries to build a bridge between them, he doesn't know. I mean, he's clearly Thomas is leaking those phone calls.
He cannot
as well.
have a private conversation with Thomas
Well,
Markle
in one of the interviews with the Mail on Sunday, he talks about how he put the phone down on Prince Harry after it was revealed that he staged the paparazzi photographs, and you know that's kind of private conversations with Prince Harry. So I think he must be concerned about
Which is interesting to any reporter or journalist or newspaper that wants to run this sort of stuff, but not the sort of thing that Harry wants to see aired in public. Some of the questions we've had on Twitter, Daniel Horden on Twitter asked us, how should Meghan Markle be handling the situation with her father, and what will the palace be telling her to do / not to do? The way I'd answer that is actually, what will Meghan be telling the palace to do or not to do? Because essentially this is her relationship with her father, and for all we know, she's told the palace, don't do anything, I don't want you to advise him, I don't want you to send somebody out there on a plane, I want to handle this myself. And she might be telling the palace to do nothing at all.
And I mean, you look at the example of the wedding, the invite list of the wedding was, she barely invited anyone apart from her mother and some of the friends from Suits to the wedding. She seems quite willing to leave a lot of that, her previous life behind.
Yes.
So whether she's going to let this play out as it's going, which is no relationship with her father, or does decide that she's going to open a dialogue, it could go either way. And really, there are good and bad sides to both options that she's got. But if she does decide to fly to, say, Royal Rota, you can guarantee that it will be a massive story, because the American press isn't going to let it go either. And so Thomas, everything that he does now, if he jumps on a plane from LAX to Heathrow, we're going to know, unfortunately, for the palace. Yeah.
And actually, how can they patch up this relationship? And actually, one thing we haven't mentioned yet is he has not yet met his son-in-law.
No.
They haven't met face to face, which is remarkable.
Yeah.
And
given who Harry is and how long they've been married.
And if you were Harry, you'd be probably pretty disappointed as well that it's gone on this way. He would have no doubt been hoping for a perfect wedding to emulate, if not top, his brother, and what happened with Kate and Will. So I think he probably is a little bit disappointed, and no doubt feels for Meghan as well. He's come into a situation where he's married the love of his life, but yet the family that she has brought with her is difficult.
In some ways, it might be quite refreshingly normal for people to see
I mean,
a family that isn't perfect.
Well, actually, if you look at some of the social media responses, half of them are about, oh, isn't it really sorry for Meghan that these nasty journalists are going up to her father and he's talking all the time. And others who actually say it's really sad that he's been shut out and the royal family is at fault for closing its doors on him. So,
If Meghan wanted to reconnect with him, I think she would. Yeah. But it hasn't.
And if he
happened
wanted
yet.
to get a message to Meghan, I think he'd be able to.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah,
he could pick up the phone and call her today.
It's clear that
instead of calling.
She either doesn't want to or doesn't feel able to connect with him at the moment. You know, on Facebook, a couple of people, Michael Revis is one. I hope I've pronounced that right, Michael. Stephanie Lear's another. What's going on with the Markle debacle? All a bit of a soap opera, isn't it? Actually, funny enough, Markle debacle was a phrase that came up, I think, on one of our tours in Toronto.
Invictus.
This is when, before Harry and Meghan announced their engagement, we were in Toronto, the Invictus Games, and it was all the whole will she, won't she turn up at whatever event. And that's where the Markle debacle, I think copyright, wasn't it, from one of our colleagues?
Simon Perry at People.
Simon
I think
Perry
gets copyright of that one.
Was the one. And again, Michael says, what's the palace doing to help contain the Thomas Markle situation? I think it's almost a bit too late for any of that. Maybe if they were going to send someone out to see him or advise him, they should have done that way before the wedding. And
there's no containment.
as I understand it, they did have someone available to do that, but you know, they've got to. The palace has got to be led by not only Meghan but also her father, and if they shun any advice, then
you can't have someone from the palace turning up to his door, knocking on the door, and then getting turned away. That would be disastrous.
I think one thing's clear: carrying on like this and giving all these interviews is not going to rebuild a relationship with his daughter.
I mean, on the subject of questions, we've had a few in on Twitter. One from Pamela. It didn't give a surname, but Sunday Handbag is her hashtag. Leave them alone, she says, when they're not on public duty. And there's a fair point. I mean, I don't think we ever approach them, film them when it's not in the public realm. I mean, the last time we saw Harry and Meghan together in the public realm was at the Centre Ballet polo match when they had that kiss in front of the cameras. It was all arranged through the palaces, and there was no snooping about in the hedgerows. I'm not saying that doesn't go on, but certainly not from the organisations represented.
I mean, if you, wasn't working in the 90s and the 80s, but if you talking to our royal colleagues who talk about what it was like back then, I think things are far more restrained in terms of the coverage and the sneaky behaviour that can go on, especially when they're in this country, compared to previous years.
I mean, I've heard recently, I mean, that does still go on, and actually when they went to Wales recently and they stayed with some people that Harry knows very well close by. I mean, the security team were aware that there were paparazzi, literally doing that, like we say, literally sitting in the hedges trying to get pictures, and so it's not to say that it doesn't happen, because it still does. Another question, which I thought was quite interesting, from Michelle Dunning on Twitter: which royal is 100% down to earth? Now, I think you'd have to start this conversation with none of them, because, I mean, how can any of them be down to earth when they're royals? Maybe we should rephrase the question: which royal is most down to earth of them all?
Well, I think Camilla would probably
Camilla as well,
get my vote on that.
Which a lot of people would be surprised at.
Yeah, I think she obviously joined the royal family having sort of lived a more normal life than most of them, and I think you can see that when you see her out and about, and she's very willing to talk to us, come down the back of the plane if we're travelling with her, make sure we're all okay. So I think she'd probably get my vote as normal.
I agree. From what I've seen from the engagements that I've attended, Camilla is the most disarming, or is the best at disarming people in terms of breaking the ice. People are so nervous when they're within 5 feet, within 50 metres of the royals. And if you're an engagement and you're lined up to speak to a royal or serve them food or show them your flowers or something like that, then people are so nervous. And she's very good at just calming the whole situation down.
And she's very funny.
She's very funny. She has a great laugh. And she seems to, everywhere she goes, she tries food, it seems. There's someone's cooking for her. She's obsessed.
She's not going to say no.
Exactly.
Whereas her husband, the Prince of Wales, will go and he'll smell things. And just, yes, very nice, and hand it back. She will try it, and I think that's great. She just loves her food when at the farmer's market. And yes, it's interesting watching her tuck in, which I think is very interesting. My vote, I would put I think I agree with you on Camilla, the Duchess of Cornwall. I'd probably have to give her half a vote, and probably to Prince Harry, because if you ever see him at the Invictus Games, or how his relationship is with any of those veterans from the Invictus Games, I think he is very natural with them. He's very down to earth, because actually when it comes to the military, he gets it. He's been there. He's been in Afghanistan. He knows what it's like. He's been with the boys when there's no cameras around him, and all he's got is, horrible food to eat out of a tin can and sit in the desert. So I'd have to vote half with him and half with the other. A couple of questions are coming about the cost of the wedding. And actually, when I talk about the wedding, I'm not talking about the one that's just gone. The other wedding, there's a second royal wedding, as we all know. I'm sure most people know that Andrew's second daughter, Eugenie, is getting married to Jack Brooksbank on the 12th of October. Now, look, we can talk about this wedding because it is going to be very similar in many ways. It's in St George's Chapel in Windsor. There'll be cameras there. They've invited 1,200 members of the public into the grounds of the castle, as have...
which is exactly what
we went through this
Harry
some
and
of
Meghan
the
did.
uploads. So, there it is. They've invited 1,200 people, as well as others from local schools. It's going to be very hard for Eugenie to stop the comparisons in October with the wedding that happened in May.
I hope they get a sunny day, because if it's raining, it's going to...
It's the UK in October.
I know. Look, there'll be interest for sure. There's certainly not going to be the amount of interest, especially globally.
Well, and this is from the broadcaster who sent whole teams of people over from Australia.
We had about 30, 40 people over from Australia for Harry and Meghan's. We're not going to do the same for Eugenie and Jack's, and it's not going to be broadcast live either. But I think that there'll be a level of interest, but we often have to remind, we have to remind people who Eugenie, our audience, who Eugenie is, and Beatrice. And because they are so far removed these days from that regular lineup that we see from engagement.
And there is a thing about the cost. I mean, Glenys Fisher on Twitter says, what about the cost of the wedding? And a couple of people have said, why are we having to pay for the security around this minor royal? I mean, a couple of things. She is equally a grandchild of the Queen as much as Harry and William are. The security costs have got to be less for a start, but that's not to say they're not going to be in the millions, and there'll be plenty of anti-monarchists or pro-Republicans, however you refer to them, who think, why on earth should the taxpayers be putting their hands in their pocket at a time of tight public finances to pay for a royal wedding? Or at least to pay for the security around the royal wedding.
Well, I think the other way to look at it is they're actually having it at their venue. At Windsor Castle is a royal palace. They're having it in a royal chapel. Is a royal peculiar. St George's. Yeah. So it's essentially a private wedding, but they can't stop people turning up. There's, of course, the classic royal superfans and anyone with a passing interest in the royals who lives within cooey of Windsor, to use an Australian term, is going to want to go and have a look. Yeah. And so you're going to have to deal with those sorts of people, so there's going to be a cost.
And well, there is an argument that there will be a cost. There would be a similar cost if you were staging, a football match or a pop concert. You would still need to have policing. So it's, a different interest that the country has.
One way to reduce the cost is not have members of the royal family go, and that's ridiculous. Yeah. The Queen's going to have, will most likely
members
go.
Of the royal family go to the royal wedding.
So you need to protect them.
Yeah.
So,
and I suppose you could extend that argument to every single royal event. Okay, so the Prince of Wales is doing a visit to Lincolnshire. Well, should he pay for the policing for that event? I mean that's sort of where we are. Obviously, the whole thing's going to be a lot smaller. A lot of questions I get: is it going to be sort of televised? You say we all think we're going to cover it as a news story. We're not aware of any plans for any network to show it live in the same way they did for Harry and Meghan. But there will be cameras, and the discussions, as we know, are going on between the broadcasters at the moment about having cameras inside St George's Chapel. And the bottom line is, the Duke and Duchess of Sussex would be there, the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge would be there, the Queen will be there, possibly Prince Philip. So there's going to be a lot of interest, just not on the same scale.
Considering that Prince Andrew has pushed so hard over the years to have his daughters treated at an equal level as Charles's sons, you'd have to guarantee surely that he would allow cameras in there to make sure that there's coverage.
And they're going to take a carriage ride.
Exactly.
I think shorter than Harry and Meghan's, but I'm sure we'll see cameras on that route.
I think the Duke of York will want something.
He's not going to let it go.
And actually, as you said about
their mother and her mother as well. Sarah will definitely.
And whether or not Prince Philip will go will be another interesting point, because actually one of the other big events of this year has not only been his hospitalisation and his hip replacement operation, and we have seen him out fairly recently this summer. He's been carriage driving. He's currently up with the Queen in Balmoral, but he has been carriage driving, the sport that he's been doing since I think before I was born. Actually, he's been doing it for so long.
And he was it was pictured with the Queen at the Guards Polo Club in June, and he was obviously pictured at the Royal Windsor Horse Show as well before the wedding. So we have seen him.
Which answers the question that did erupt on social media: is he dead or alive? Which is something we don't normally discuss, and most people know that we're aware of his age. He's just turned 97, and therefore, we have to be prepared for any eventuality, put it that way. But there was an incident a little while ago when social media basically was claiming that he'd passed away, and that presents us all who work in this sphere and all our colleagues on the Royal Rota with that conundrum. Do you report that? How do you get any information about his health? Because what the palace don't do is give you a running commentary on his health, and nor do they want to get involved in that sort of thing.
And when that popped up, I'm sure all of us got a little bit of a fear about that when that moment does come.
Of course.
And look, social media can be, I mean, this is a good platform, but it can be damaging and can affect real reporting and people who have real insight into what's going on, and a lot of people don't have that.
And I was aware of some internal conversations going on around the time, about his health and whether something had happened, but I sort of knew that it had broken out into the wider public when I got a text from a friend of mine who works in the City of London, nothing to do with media at all, and says, "Oh, I hear the Duke of Edinburgh's died." At which place I thought, oh dear, this has got pretty big now and difficult to contain.
Yeah, it was amazing how quickly that frenzy started on Twitter. It was trending, and I think, whatever you think, he's still a father and a grandfather and a husband. It's quite insensitive.
And it's not as if the palace doesn't know that sort of thing is happening as well.
Yes.
They're well aware.
But he wasn't with his wife at the time. I think the Queen was in Balmoral. He was still at Wood Farm in Sandringham, which is where he's been spending a lot of time since his retirement. He spends a lot of time in Sandringham. I'm not sure quite how that conversation goes, but hello, dear.
Are you there?
Are you all right? I mean, or just basically their disapproval of how social media allows these discussions to go much further than they would have done in the past. So, I think we didn't report it, and it didn't happen on your network either.
No.
So,
it wasn't really.
Well, I think you can't go to where with a rumour like that, because it damages your own credibility.
Yeah.
Because people are trusting you to tell them when something like that does actually happen.
So listen, before we wrap up, let's have a quick check. So actually quite a busy autumn period coming up. We've already mentioned Royal Wedding #2.
We should just say that we've seen Prince Philip at the weekend at Balmoral with the Queen.
In the car
together. Going to church.
Recently
so
seen
we
in
now
the
know
car,
he's moved from
which
Sandringham
some
up
headlines
in Balmoral.
claimed he'd surprised the Queen by turning up in the car, and I'm sure the Queen knew about it all along, that her husband was coming
there was
with
some
her.
headlines saying surprise, and there was quite a funny tweet from Dickie Arbiter, who's the Queen's former press secretary, saying, Her Majesty doesn't do surprises. She knows exactly who is arriving at Balmoral and when. Quite.
Good, yes, and that he was with her in the car. So we know, as recently as this weekend, that all is well.
It's always nice to see him
Prince Philip.
out and about.
So very looking ahead. So we've got the royal wedding on the 12th of October. We've already ticked that off. Very quickly, just about the royal tour. How much are Australians looking forward to welcoming not just any old royals, but Harry and Meghan?
And this is a big deal. I mean, it's not their first overseas trip, but it's their first big overseas trip to a Commonwealth country. And I think we all kind of thought that maybe Canada would have been the first stop for them with...
There's a bit of a fight between you and Canada.
Well, I mean, why would you not want to come to Australia? It's far more beautiful. With Meghan's ties to suits. But look, they'll be going to Australia, New Zealand, Tonga and Fiji, I think it is. The Invictus Games obviously very important to Harry, being staged in Sydney. A lot of build-up towards that.
Of course, it was the Invictus Games in Toronto where we first saw them together as a couple, their first public outing.
And, maybe Meghan might go to support the Canadian or the American team by herself, potentially. That could be maybe a first little stop for her.
I don't think there's any supporting of any particular team.
No.
It would be a bit of a difficult path to go down.
The interest will be big. From a Channel 7 point of view, we'll certainly be doing special programmes and special coverage of their
Australia's all about sport, so therefore the Invictus Games being sporting and also about military veterans, whether they've got sort of a mental illness or a physical illness. That's a big thing for you guys, surely.
Exactly. Well, look, we
like to win sport.
We like to win. We like to beat the Brits. And as you say, look, having spoken to a lot of those athletes, it's not about the winning; it's about the participating, especially with the Invictus Games. But Australian veterans have fought alongside the Brits and the Americans and the Canadians in Iraq and Afghanistan over the last 15, 20 years. So it's very important from that point of view. And from a tour point of view, we'll see them in Sydney. We would hope to see them in some of the other Australian capitals as well. We would all love to see a shot where maybe Meghan is holding a koala or alongside a kangaroo. Someone may name a bilby or a
and that's the picture of the photographers is Meghan and kangaroo is what
I think so. Yeah. And Harry, of course, is well familiar with that other half. He's well familiar with Australia in that he spent some time jackarooing in Australia. He's been on private visits. He has some friends in Australia. both of his and of his father's.
There's this country called New Zealand as well. You've heard of
Well, they'll go to New Zealand. I don't know why they would go there. And then, of course, Fiji and Tonga will also offer some interesting cultural events for them as well.
So we've got all that to discuss and dissect when it happens later on in the autumn. We've also got Prince Charles's 70th coming up. That's quite a big deal. We understand he's doing a tour. We understand it's in Africa, so that's quite a big one for him. And then he comes back from that, and for the second year running, will lead the nation in remembrance at the cenotaph. So all in all, there's a pretty busy period coming up. August was the quiet time, as you mentioned a little while ago, and busy times and lots to discuss coming up.
A busy year, really, because the first half of this year was incredibly busy, and the back half will be equally so.
Yeah, you couldn't say being a royal correspondent is a quiet job
normally
anymore.
A royal baby would be the big event of the year, but we
another one will come at some point.
And sorry, actually, talking of royal babies, and potentially there's always speculation about Harry and Meghan. There's none of our business to discuss their plans, but Fiji is actually a country which is moderately at risk from Zika virus. And it actually says on the Foreign and Commonwealth Office advice about travelling there and not going there when you're pregnant. Now, listen, I only offer that up because it's facts and it's out there in the public domain, but quite how that beds down with the royals, we don't know. Great to have you in here. Thanks for your insights, and we look forward to seeing how the Australians react to the Duke and Duchess of Sussex. I think we've only called them that once. Have we called them Harry and Meghan the rest of the time?
Most of the time.
We need to get
get used to that
in with the right terminology. But it's been a pleasure having you here. Thank you very much indeed. And the next time we do this, we will be talking about the Australia tour, and we'll try possibly to do one of these when we're in Australia. We can get the technology to work. But for now, that's the first Royal Rota. Any suggestions, comments, negative or positive, hopefully the latter, not the former, then do let us know, and we hope to see you again on here soon.